Nettles. What happened to Nettles? House of the Dragon. Ah, a lot of people are complaining about the finale. I'm gonna tell you something. If you guys read the books and then you watch the adaptation, you're gonna be disappointed. The books are always better than the adaptations because CGI. Now you got people saying, why did the writers do what they did? Because there was no real finale. There was no action. It was all, dialogue. It was, the House of Valerian, the son finally, dad's trying to help him out. He's like, you're trying to help me? I've been in a bad position for the longest. And then he mentions a kid that, was able to eat the choicest meats while he starved. And then the kid is gone. And I think he was talking about his son. He's like, you walked by and you gave your son the choicest food while me and my brother starved. And you knew who we were. You knew who we were. He's like, now your son is dead. So he confirms that his son is dead because, the dragon chose someone else. That means the rider's dead. And your wife is dead. And I'm looking at it like this from a dialogue point of view. The season finale was not that bad. No, we did not get a Sheep Stealer is not this huge dragon. Somebody was saying Sheep Stealer is a small dragon. I don't think Sheep Stealer is supposed to be the largest dragon, that they have. But we don't know if Sheep Stealer is still growing, and it probably is because you got to understand Sheep Stealer is a wild dragon. Any wild dragon is still growing. Any dragon that's out there just chilling, doing what they want, is still growing. The ones that stop growing are the ones that they keep in the caves. So Sheep Stealer is not that big. Then we get, the whole scene with Sheep Stealer and whoever this Valerian is. Nonetheless, that's the wrong character because Nettles is the one who actually gets a hold of Sheep Stealer. But they don't have Nettles in this story, so they're going to give this dragon to whoever this woman is. Listen, I was still entertained, even though I was disappointed. Just like season 8, I was disappointed too. Like, how can Arya just kill the Night King so easily? This badass who was knocking down dragons with an ice spear. It's like, come on, this dude is, the fight that Jon Snow had with one of the leader White Walkers was bad ass. And then when you read about, who these guys are and the actual weapons that they use, look, these guys are unstoppable, is what's in your head. Even the Night King, unstoppable is what's in your head. So there's no way Arya is going to come out of nowhere and stab him with obsidian and then kill the Night King. It's like, no, the Night King would have saw this coming a mile away. But, hey, Arya, whatever. Nonetheless, like I said, the season finale was not too terrible for me. Otto Hightower is locked up. We didn't know Otto Hightower was locked up. But here's the thing. We knew that Christian Cole cut off the Breezeberry's head. He cut off the leader of the Breezeberry. He cut that dude's head off. And the dude said before he got his head cut off, this is going to come back to haunt you. Like, he already knew that this is a bad idea for you to cut off my head. Like, my head, do you know who I am? Pretty much saying there's so much that I'm connected to in these lands. If you cut my head off, you're going to lose because of who I'm connected to, who that you don't know about. And sure enough, Kroll cuts his head off, and what happens? They go to war with the Hightowers. Boom. What happens to Otto? Otto was sent from being the hand of the king. He was sent home by Alicent, who messed this whole thing up. He was sent home. On his way home, boom, they caught him. So now you got the Hightowers who are, and at the end, you show the Hightowers actually going to war. But here's the thing, you don't know who they're going to war for. When they show the Hightowers marching out, they also show a dragon flying overhead. Now, the dragon flying overhead, you're like, whose dragon is that? You know what I'm saying? Is that Alicent's, her son? Because remember, she asked about her son to her brother, Gawain. He's like, yo, how's my son doing? You know, he's a good kid, you know, being that you didn't raise him in King's Landing and all this other stuff. She's like, great. So now it's like, did a Hightower claim a dragon? Because there's a young dragon flying overhead at the end of that clip. It's just like, I wonder, you know, who is riding this dragon? And obviously it's on the side of the Hightowers, but are the Hightowers marching out to meet the Breezeberry? Like what? Like, what's that all about? Huh? I don't know. Then you show the Freys marching out. And it's like, okay, now we have the Freys marching out from the twins. We know that the Freys are on the side of the Blacks. So we see the Greens marching out. We see the Blacks marching out. And we see the Sea Snake heading out. And we also see the pirates who are setting out. And this another thing. The Lannisters already had an army, but the Lannisters went to Essos, and they went to the worst people in the world to align themselves with, the pirates. And this is really gets me. The Sea Snake was at war with the Crab King until Daemon came and pretty much fried them all, right? That war was on the steps. That war was for the steps. They were like, give us the stepstones. Just like it's just rocks, blah, blah, blah. No, no, it is not just rocks. It's actually the way into the narrow sea. That's what the steps are for. If you blockade the narrow sea, guess what it's gonna be? It's gonna be like the Freys and the twins. They're gonna set up a toll at the steps. They're gonna set up a toll at the steps is what these pirates are gonna do. And they're gonna block the whole entrance into the narrow sea, which is gonna affect both sides. So that's why they're just like, give us the steps we're taking. Well, the steps were already fought over. So when you start looking at it and you're going, wait a minute. Daemon came in and cleared the steps from the Crab King, right? The Crab King who was nailing everybody to stakes and letting the crabs eat them, right? That dude also was affected by grayscale. I think something was eating at him. Anyways, so that whole thing happened. Then when you look at the Valerians, they fought for that area too, right? Boom, you're going, okay. Now, when you look at the finale and you're going, well, if the pirates get the steps back, then the Valerians and the Sea Snake, who's already heading out to face them, are gonna have to fight them actually on the steps. So when the war is over for them fighting at sea, they're still gonna have to deal with them when they get home. That's what I saw. I'm just like, well, this is not gonna end. If they give them these stones, this is just not gonna end. The Sea Snake is gonna have to handle them once they get home, like it's gonna be a never ending thing. But then when you start looking at the foresight, we already know that Daemon and Aemon both die in the God's Eye. So now you're like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Jace, he dies during the war. The Queen, dies during the war. Damon and Aemon die during the war. The king and Sunfire, uh, they live after the war, but Sunfire can't fly. Uh, we don't know what happened to, well, Adam dies during the war. Shoot, the two new riders for the Blacks pretty much are on their own. The one guy with the white hair, shoot, not his, what is that guy's name? Basically, he betrays the Blacks and he decides he wants to be king. So he tries to set up his own kingdom, right? And then the other guy is just a buffoon. Oath is just a buffoon. We don't know what the hell he does, but nonetheless, he doesn't last too long either. But the fact is that the steps are going to be claimed by the pirates if they make it past the sea snake, and it causes a whole new set of issues because everybody else is fighting for the crown. So when you're looking at where the fighting is actually going to happen, and then when you look at the outskirts of what's going to happen, it creates a whole new story that I'm actually interested in. And this is why I'm like, the season finale isn't that bad. If you start looking at the whole picture, you're like, wait a minute, all of these fights are going to happen, but this over here is still going to be a major problem because you got to understand, you have Lys, Essos, and Braavos. That's where these pirates came from. They're across the Narrow Sea. Now they're involved with Westeros. Don't forget the Iron Bank is involved. the Iron Bank is, everybody is invested in this Iron Throne is what I'm saying. And now you're bringing all these other people into it, and it's just gonna be this huge, like, I understand why they didn't do this at the end of the episode, because the amount of people that are involved in this is not just Westeros anymore. It's not even close anymore. And then you have Daemon. I admit they could have done more with Daemon. They could have. Matter of fact, Aemon became more interesting than Daemon because he went and burned that city or that small town, but they didn't show him burning the small town. And actually, in the books, he does a lot more than that. He burns a lot of people who were on the side of the Blacks, but they didn't show him burning it. They just showed him flying over it after he burned it. So it's like, it's like you guys are just skipping things that are in the book in order to try to fill the space. It's like, do you want to see that? Do you want them to take their time so they can show you that and blah, blah, blah? If they do, then you're going to miss all of the other setups that are coming at the end. We see, but when it comes to Daemon and, the rumor that he is raising pretty much a kingdom in the Riverlands. And then Rhaenyra gets this news. She flies out to see him, and she realizes this guy has a whole army. And if he does decide to become king, it's a flashback from Game of Thrones that we seen a couple years ago when Joffrey was king. What did they talk about? They talked about the War of the Nine Penny Kings. So when you really start looking at what they're doing, they're always flashing back to the Game of Thrones that we seen a couple years ago. Remember the War of the Nine Penny Kings? All these people claim to be king of their own territory. That same thing is happening. That same thing is happening, but now the people who have dragons are trying to claim, kingship. So if you have a dragon, it's easy for you to say, hey, I'm king of this area. I'm king of that area. Now, luckily, the witch showed Daemon actually what all these dragons are for and, stopping this whole thing that happened years ago with the First Men. And this war between the Children of the Forest and the First Men, and what the Children of the Forest did to the First Men in order to stop them. This is before the agreement. In order to stop them, what did they do? They took obsidian And this is why the Night King dying from obsidian just, I don't get it. Because they took obsidian, which is dragon glass, and they did some magic to it. Then they stuck it into his heart. So the Night King is full of magic. And then they built the wall. And when you saw the Stark, what's his name? The one that would go across the wall and killed and hunt, and he couldn't come back because he got affected by something. He said, listen, the wall itself is not just ice. There's magic in the wall. So he couldn't come back across the wall because of the magic. And when I looked at that, I go, this is the same magic that the little green people used to help fortify the wall. This is the same magic that is in the Night King. How can the Night King be affected by the same magic that's inside of him? The Night King killed a dragon, the dragon blew down the wall, then they crossed over it. Other than that, the White Walkers could not cross the wall. And then I even question that because you had White Walkers who were already on the other side of the wall because they attacked the Night's Watch. So I'm like, the storylines, everything, you really have to sit down and think about how all this is playing out. Well, anyways, Daemon gets his flashback. Well, actually, he touches the weirwood tree, and that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother thing. He touches the weirwood tree because the witch told him to touch the weirwood tree. The weirwood tree bleeds. He shows him a vision of the Night King. Then he shows him a vision of Daenerys, and then her 3 dragons. So basically, there is a 3-eyed raven who's involved in this whole thing. When you look at that, you're going, the 3-eyed raven, for one, was a Targaryen. That's for one. The 3-eyed raven was a Targaryen. The 3-eyed raven wasn't even existent at that time. Now we're looking at who is the 3-eyed raven that is showing you the future. And I'm telling you, it is so convoluted that it's disappointing if you're not paying attention and you don't think about what happened years ago. If you don't start asking a question, who's this, who's that, who's this, and how are these timelines and all this, if you're just looking for action, you don't want to watch Game of Thrones. It's going to disappoint you every time. Every season finale is going to disappoint you because what they're actually doing is they're trying to loop these timelines together in order for it to be a mental orgasm is what they're really trying to do. They're trying to match the poise of the writer. And the writer's a good writer, but he actually got a lot of his stuff from English lore. All the people who he's talking about, if you look at, the history of England's history, they're all kings and queens from history of England. But nonetheless, when I look at even when you look at the magic that is in, okay, so let's look at another thing. Let's take Daenerys. Daenerys had 3 eggs that were with her, right? Daenerys is the only Targaryen that we know of that cannot be burnt. Remember, Jel Masmo, right? She's like, I'm Daenerys the unburnt. I can walk through fire. Fire doesn't burn me. She burned down that one house when all those guys was about to take advantage of her, right? Boom, Jel Masmo. I can't be burnt. My clothes can burn, but I can't be burnt. When you look at Valyrian history, you're like, wait a minute, Targaryens and Valyrians, for one, you weren't even the highest order of the Valyrian Empire. Or, you're like, wait a minute, how is it that you can do that? Once again, they used magic. They used magic to the point where the Targaryens can actually birth dragons. Now, we don't see none of that. We see the eggs. You know, we see Oath almost step on some eggs. You know, we see the whole patch of eggs, but we don't see any Targaryen birthing dragons. When Daenerys says, "I am blood of the dragon," she means that, meaning her blood is actually dragon's blood. So all of this magic that is out there is either good or bad magic. When you look at the Targaryens, they use bad magic to create the bond between them and the dragons. That's bad magic that they use, but yet they're supposed to be kings and queens. No, these were actually horrible people that would feed other people to dragons. The Targaryens are the worst of the worst on the planet. They're the worst people that they are. When you're looking at good magic, you'll be looking at wargs like Jon Snow. And I'm not even gonna get into that, but like Jon Snow and all that, which brings me all the way back to Daemon touching the weirwood tree. When you have Daemon touching the weirwood tree, the witch herself is full of magic. She uses magic to mess with Daemon in his dreams. Also, the weirwood trees are the ones who are giving Daemon these horrible imaginations too. So both her and the weirwood trees are working together against Daemon, the way I see it. The way I see it. Because if Daemon becomes king, remember, his brother did not want Daemon to become king. Why? Because Daemon would be a terrible king. Why? Because of his temper. You have to understand, his dragon is the only person, the only thing that understands Daemon. That's why they click so well. Vermithor is the only thing that understands him. If Daemon was to become king, he would burn the realm. He would start wars everywhere. If you didn't listen to him, he would just burn you. Remember what he said? Remember what he said to the Brackens? He was like, "Swear allegiance to me, or you shall burn." And they said, "I would rather burn." Well, guess what happened in the books? He said, "Swear allegiance to me, or you will burn." And they said, "We will swear allegiance to you." All this other stuff, where the Brackens' children were killed because Daemon told their enemies to do, not so. He showed up with Vermithor and he said, "Swear allegiance to me or else." They swore allegiance to them. They didn't turn around and say, "Hey, we'd rather burn." Matter of fact, there's no one in the books that say, "Hey, I'd rather burn." There's no one in the books doing that. This is why, the king was like, "No, I don't want to give you the realm. I'm going to give it to, what's her name? I'm going to give it to her because I'm not going to give it to you because I know what you're going to do." Don't forget, the king, Viserys, don't forget who he was. He was about peace. He wanted to keep peace as long as possible. Why? Because he wanted to reserve his dragons. He wanted to reserve every dragon he had. Why? Because he knew about the Night King. And he knew if he gave his brother a chance, the brother would cause wars, tear down the realm, and they would not have a chance against the Night King. Don't forget, the Night King has come across the wall before, but it wasn't a wall there. The Night King has came across the wall. Remember what Old Nan said? Old Nan said she has seen a time where kids would grow up in the night. It would be constant night and freezing cold. So the long night, she said, fear of the long night, fear of the weirwood spiders. They were bigger than hounds. This is what the king was trying to prepare for because he knew winter was coming. When Daemon touched the weirwood tree, he finally got it. He was like, "Oh, I have to put my sister," or whoever she is to him, "I have to put my niece, right? I have to put my niece on the throne. Even though I could become king," which is what the other guy said to him, he said, "We need a king." Those people don't understand that across the wall is a menace that will kill everybody and will kill everything they know. Damon finally got it from the witch. He goes, he bends the knee to his sister because he's like, we need somebody with a level head. But when you look at the whole thing, you read the books, you'll find out that all of those people perish. And then, of course, we have the Night King coming across the wall, which is still baffling because where the Night King lives at, even if you kill the Night King, you still have not stopped what the Children of the Forest did to the Night King. So the season finale is not that bad to me. I'm looking at it from the backstories, added to the books, added to all the other stuff, and I'm intrigued. I think it's not terrible writing. It's not a terrible visual adaptation. At least we get to see a visual adaptation. We get to understand why Jace is upset because he's a bastard, so he doesn't have a claim to the kingdom. If any bastard can come and claim the kingdom, but nonetheless, he's still a prince, so yes, he does, even though that's not going to matter. You know, we get to see the Queen of the Greens, the Queen Regent, who started the whole thing, her come in and she has to make a choice. She's like, I'm going to kill your kid. You killed my kid. I'm going to kill your kid. A son for a son. Make a choice. What do you want to do? She doesn't want to kill her son. But when she looks at it, she goes, my son is pretty much dead. He's feeble. He can't move. He has to drink milk of the poppy. He's done. He's done. My son can't do it. And she cries, but she's like, I gotta kill my kid. Also, she realizes that her children are terrible. And the only one that's not terrible is the queen. And the queen will not ride. She won't get up on her dragon and ride because she knows innocent people will die. So you see her protecting her from her son. Like you see the brother and sister fight. He's like, you need to get on Dreamfire and go out here and help us, burn everything that moves. And she's like, I'm not about to burn anybody. He's like, get your ass in gear. This is a war. She's like, I don't want anything to do with this war. I don't want no parts to do with it. Nonetheless, I already lost a child. Don't forget, my kid got his head cut off, and I had to make a choice on which kid was going to get their head cut off. I had to sit here and make a choice. While you guys were out messing around and sleeping in whorehouses, Cheese and his buddy were up here, and they said, which one? And she pointed at the child that she wanted to get her head cut off and held the other one and watched the child get his head cut off. While Queen Alicent was getting banged out by the Kingsguard, who should have been in the hallway watching, which is his job. He was in there banging out my mother. So Blood and Cheese was in there murdering my child, cut his head clean the hell off. And then the only redemption was you hung every rat catcher that was, killing rats. You idiot. Do you not understand? Rats are everywhere. We need rat catchers. But you killed all the rat catchers. So now Alicent's in her room and she's looking and there's a rat just right there doing everything because you killed all the rat catchers, you idiots. So it's good to me. I like all the details. I think that Alicent is a great I don't know, she's a villain to me. She's the one that kicked this whole thing off because she wanted to stay in the power. We know that the Hightowers wanted to stay in the power. We know that Otto set this thing up, but Otto did not set up the lie, but he helped with the lie. when you read the books, you read how vicious this lie was. When King Viserys died, one of the king's guards actually stabs one of the maesters, who was like, wait a minute, the king had already made up his mind. Well, they put a knife through his neck. And right there at the small council, they put a knife right through his neck and was just like, boom, we know who's gonna be king. And then they crowned him. So you have Valerians, or you have Valerians who don't want to fight. But you have the Hightowers who are so greedy and were never in a real position of power to run the kingdom. They carpe diem. They seized the moment. They were just like, oh, well, I'm gonna marry you to the king, and once you're gonna be the queen, and you're gonna have kids, blah blah blah. And then one of your children's gonna be the king. You're gonna be the queen regent, which means she'll still have some kind of power. But she started losing her power after they kicked her off of the council. Alicent is the real criminal here, 100%. And she's the reason why the realm burns. And she is the reason why unstable people should not be in a position of power. So I like to look at all the details. You know, you got your crazies who, you got to understand, the Valerians themselves are bad. They're bad people. But one of the reasons why they're bad is because they're inbred. There's some inbred hillbilly crazies is what they are, riding upon nuclear weapons. That's why the Valerians are such terrible people. You know what I mean? And another thing is their instability ranges from the blood magic that they use. Don't forget, we see blood magic all through Game of Thrones. And every time you see blood magic, what happens? How did Renly die? King Renly. King Renly died because his brother used blood magic on him and killed him. And then what happened to his brother, Stannis? His brother Stannis died in the woods trying to pretty much take over a kingdom. And, you know, he got killed by Renly's Kingsguard. And she was like, did you use blood magic to kill King Renly? And he said, yes, I did. And then she drew her sword and killed him because blood magic is bad. So the Valerians are, you know, you're like, oh, the Valerians should be, you know, this silver-haired. No, they are terrible people. You're going to find that out even as you go. We seen what Daenerys did. Daenerys burned the whole city that would have been loyal to her. Why? Because she was the Mad King's daughter. The Mad King himself, the Mad King himself went mad. For one, he was never a smart person. Another thing, the Mad King went mad because of he had the Master of Whispers telling him things that weren't true. So who is he? Varys the Spider. That's what happened to the Mad King. He kept listening to Varys. And then don't forget the Mad King got captured. And when he got captured, after he got captured, he became worse. He's like, I don't trust anybody. And then he stopped taking showers. He stopped changing his clothes. He would brutalize his wife. The Mad King was terrible. And then where Jaime the Oathbreaker, the Kingslayer, comes in is when the Mad King knew that he had lost the war. Why? Because his son got his chest caved in by King Robert. You know, at the Ruby Ford in the water, Robert caved his chest in. And when Robert caved his chest in, they saw, for one, this is how brutal it is. When Robert caved his chest in, the rubies that were on his breastplate, they went flying all into the river. What the men did on both sides, they stopped fighting each other and they started diving for the rubies. Once they saw them rubies, they were just like, that's why they called it the Ruby Ford. They start jumping in the water and was just like, screw that. Let's get the rubies. Why? Because most of those guys they're poor. They come from minor houses. And they know if they get themselves on a ruby, that their family can come up. So it was all about money. So they jumped in the water, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as the king heard that, the king said, if Robert is going to take over King's Landing, then he is going to be king of what? Ashes. Where have we heard this before? When Daenerys was being counseled, you don't want to be the queen of what? Ashes. What have we heard in this finale, where the queen was saying that she will not burn people. She doesn't want to be what? The queen of ashes. So you have these people who are like, do not burn the realm with these nuclear weapons. Don't do it. Find a way to get around it. And this is why you have the queen saying, I don't want to fight. Why? Because she's a dreamer. She's already seen her brother's ending. She's like, you're going to die at the God's eye. So if she's telling him, you're going to die at the God's eye, he's saying, if I kill you, blah, blah, blah. She said, it doesn't matter. You're going to die at the God's eye. It's over for you. It's a wrap. If she's seeing all this, then guess what else she's seeing? A kingdom burned. She's like, I don't want to be any part of this, because there's going to be innocent people and there's going to be no resolve. It's just going to be a kingdom of ashes. I could go on and on and on. I don't know how many people are listening or even care. But my point is, if you look at Game of Thrones, all the way from the beginning, all the way from when Ned Stark cut off that guy's head, which is really when you start getting into it. When Ned Stark cut off that guy's head, that guy, what did he say? I saw the White Walkers. And Ned Stark said, people see what they want to. It was the beginning of ignorance. And this is Ned Stark we're talking about. It was the beginning of ignorance. This ignorance happened because of what we're seeing now. We're seeing Aemon and the witch and the queen all know that across the wall there's the Night King, who's the definite threat. But what do we see? None of them are telling anybody else. It's because of ignorance that Ned Stark cut off that guy's head and didn't say, tell me more about it. Where did you see him? Where'd you see him? How many were there? What happened? No, Ned Stark, being a dutiful soldier, he has to watch the North. So he says anybody who abandons the wall automatically gets their head cut off. This is the beginning of ignorance. And how did Ned Stark die? He got his head cut off. But Ned Stark said when he was asked by Varys, he was like, do you want to live? And he says, I don't care about my life. What happened when Ned Stark's neck got on that chopping block? He tried to bargain with Joffrey. He cared about his life because he knew it was over. Joffrey wasn't supposed to take Ned Stark's head. He was supposed to bargain with him. He was supposed to parlay with him. But Joffrey was like, I am the king. We see this over and over and over again. We see where idiots are part of the kingdom. And what happened? The kingdom burns because of it. So that's what I'm saying. The finale is not that bad when you start putting all the pieces back together and you start looking at what these kings and queens were about and how they're all ignoring the simple fact that they can all be slaughtered within one night. And the long night can take all of them and wipe all of them out in an instant. And so that's why I really like the Game of Thrones. Yes, some of it is overwhelming. We didn't get to see not one person die, even though we heard a bunch of people die. People are upset about that. we know that Nettles is not going to capture Sheep Stealer or ride Sheep Stealer. We get somebody else who's riding Sheep Stealer. And that whole thing is convoluted. Sheep Stealer is not that big. We thought Sheep Stealer would be bigger. That's convoluted. We still haven't got to see the other wild dragon. Don't forget, there's 3 wild dragons. There's Sheep Stealer, there's the Cannibal, and there's another wild dragon that's flying around out there, and they're all on Dragonstone. So more idiocy. Jace convinces his mother that there are people who can ride dragons. So what does she do? She goes and gets a bunch of people with white hair and says, listen, some of you guys can ride dragons. These people were starving. She's the one that gave them food. So they're just like, okay, fine. You want us to ride dragons? Fine. She said, but you might not live. Just letting you know now. What happened? The dragon burned almost all of them. So it's just, like I said, it's just more idiocy, more bad choices, even though they were warned by the dragon tamers or whoever those guys. They were like, this is not the way things are done. Don't do this. A bunch of people got pretty much eaten. And then when I look at the queen, I'm like, I think you really wanted to feed your dragon, because the dragon cooked and ate all of those people. The dragon didn't waste any of them. I think you really wanted to just, feed your dragon. So, yeah, anyways. So like I said, the finale wasn't that bad when you really start looking at Game of Thrones. It's very, very interesting. I mean, I could keep talking about it forever. I'm sure you guys don't care. But another problem is 2 years down the line is a long time before we see anything else with Game of Thrones. Now, people are complaining about that, but people forget Game of Thrones releases animations, and they're all on YouTube. So if you want to get your fix on Game of Thrones while you're waiting for the next season, excuse me, while you're waiting for the next season, Game of Thrones releases animations and voiceovers by the people who are actually in the current Game of Thrones series. So, if you want to hear Queen Alicent talk about the Hightowers, there's going to probably be a Hightower animation, and it's going to talk about some of their history and all of that other stuff. So it's like people, 2 years is a long time, but just like The Boys have, they release animations, so you're not just like, oh, forget about The Boys. No, they're going to release all kind of stuff in between there to keep you satiated until the series comes out again. And the great thing about those animations is you get to see, all kind of stuff that happens in Bravos, Essos, and places like that. And even beyond there, don't forget Arya Stark. She said, what is west of Westeros? And they were like, I don't know. She said, that's where I'm going. So there's so much storyline. You got to understand, there's the Sapphire Owls that are out there where, who's that tall chick that was, that captured Jaime Lannister? Brienne of Tarth. There's Tarth. We've never been to Tarth. There's Bear. We've only been to Bear Out or wherever that is that Ser Jorah Mormont was from. We only been there once because it's a small kingdom. Even beyond there are creatures that are ridiculous. When Balerion, the Black Dread, he was being ridden by a woman, I forgot which one she was. They rode all the way back to Valyria. And when they did, and she returned 3 years later, she had parasites that were in her body and her skin was being burned. Well, she was in such terrible shape that the maesters took her and dumped her in cold water to try to cool her body. Well, that was the huge mistake because the parasites that were in her start busting out of her and they burned her body to cinder. And the thing about it was these parasites had faces. So what they were is they were fireworms. These fireworms come from Valeria. They come from the mountain. Don't forget. Okay, what Valeria was basically built on is a bunch of volcanoes. All right. So there are creatures that live in these volcanoes and they're huge. And actually the dragon, when she turned with Valerion, it had this huge scratch in it because it had fought one of these worms. Like these things are ridiculous. Also, there are dragons that are way bigger than the ones we've seen. There's an ice dragon, and this thing is colossal. And all it does is shoot ice, and it's covered with nothing but ice. There's also sea dragons, and they only mention these sea dragons every now and then, but these things are so big that they can tear apart continents. I mean, but they live in the sea and they're actually there. So there are all kind of like Westeros is a very, very small part of Game of Thrones. Very, 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 very small part, you know. And don't forget, we haven't even seen even the Royne. We haven't seen Westeros was at war with the Roiner. The people who came to Westeros first were people from the Royne. They were actually being ruled by a woman, actually, at one time. But when they went to war with the Valyrians, they had an army of 250,000. That army was marching towards Valyrian, and then the Valyrians said, oh, but no, see, they went and released 300 dragons and burnt all of them to sunder except for the king. What they did was they captured the king and they made him watch as everybody was being burned to cinder. So what he did was he conjured up magic because the Valyrians did not know that the Royne had magic in the water. So he conjured up the magic of the Royne and it swallowed up a bunch of their army. And once that happened, it caused what? Grayscale. So anybody who travels back to Valyria can get grayscale, and that's where it comes from. It comes from the curse of the Royne. It's your boy Tone. I'll holler at you guys. Let me know if you guys are entertained by this, and we'll talk about it some more. I'm out.